Hi, Orukomini Kola Tubosun. My name is Kola Tubosun. I'm a Nigerian writer and linguist based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm here to talk to you today about African languages on the internet, a topic that has been very dear to my heart for the better part of over 15 years. When we talk about African languages on the internet, what are we talking about? Usually we're talking about the presence and the capability of the languages spoken on the continent with the tools of technology and the internet itself as a whole. Today, when you look at the internet, the web consists of several languages of the world, right? But when we have a close scrutiny, you find that most of the languages there are already the big, famous, and globally recognized languages. I read this article a while ago from onbabel.com, and it shows a list of the first 12 top languages on the internet. It includes English, Chinese, Spanish, Japanese, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Russian, French, Korean, Turkish, and Italian. And of all these languages, English language has 55.7%, even though it's, of course, makes sense, spoken by 565 million people around the world. But it's followed by Chinese, which is 3.3%, which is spoken by 509 million people. Then it follows by Spanish and Japanese and Portuguese and the rest of them. All of them with even lower, with a very high number of speakers around the world, but with lower representation on the internet. Now, what I noticed here, of course, was that there was no African language there at all. And this concerned me, because this is just a recent post, but it's concerned me for a long time. And this started way back when I was in university, when I realized that when you type in Yoruba on the Microsoft Word, there's a red wriggly line that comes under it to show that it's not a word that English language recognizes. And over time, the idea has been built into our heads that African languages don't really quite matter in the larger scale of things. And so what my work has been over the last couple of years is to find a way to negate that assumption and to create as much platforms as possible, as many platforms as possible, and create as much products and projects as possible to help include African language in the conversation, in the global conversation on the internet. And to do this, in 2015, we launched yorubaname.com, which is a multimedia dictionary of names, which has pronunciation, which has spelling and guidance, etc. Before then, in 2011, I helped lead a campaign to have Twitter include Yoruba as one of the languages in which the platform was being translated. Before then, or during around that same time, I've helped Google with Google Translate. When I finally worked at Google myself, I helped set up the Nigerian English. I helped work on the Nigerian English voice assistant project, which had Google now with voice assistants in Nigerian English for people who use the taxis and Google Maps and Google Assistants. I've also worked on a number of other different projects. But still, when you look on the internet today, there are still a lot of setbacks to African language presence online. One of them is that African countries don't actually measure the languages spoken by their citizens. They ask about religion, they ask about ethnic group, they ask about a number of other different demographic issues, but they never ask about language. And as a result, we don't quite know how many languages remain on the continent today in viable state. And because of that, we can't really make policy on their basis. Of course, many who also don't speak the language to their children, which is a big deal. But I've always felt that speaking a language to the children, even though very good and very important in passing the language across to the next generation, also using the language on the internet is actually sometimes a very also an equally important means. And so, if you don't, the internet is where most people spend their time. Young people today spend all their time on their mobile phones. And if you can make those languages available on those spaces and make sure that the tools that people use online, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., exist in those languages, and you find that the translation platforms and machines are capable of working in those African languages, right now they don't, then more people will be willing to use those devices and to come online, and more people who don't even speak English at all will be willing to use the internet and embrace it. I've talked about the dimensions of explosion in economics as well. Imagine if you wanted to use a bank and you realize that your bank does not, the ATM, the cash machine of your bank, does not exist in the language you speak. How would you trust a bank to be able to give them your money if you know that you're not going to be able to remove the money in the language you understand? So there are so many levels of exclusion that have existed over time in technology. African languages have suffered the most because many of us who work in the field haven't done enough to empower those languages, and we haven't created enough tools of technology to help benefit the languages. So much of my work is in that regard, to make sure that as many tools as possible that exist around the world, we create them in African languages as well, starting with Yoruba, which is the one I speak, and find a way to create as many opportunities for people who speak Yoruba around the world. It's about 30 million, 40 million speakers, can use the tools of technology to benefit themselves and to communicate with people around the world. So that's the state of African languages today on the internet. It's a huge challenge still exists, and we need a lot of effort by people like me, and people in education, people in policy, linguists, students, teachers, to create tools and to create opportunities. And we need policymakers in internet technologies as well to do the same, so that more languages can benefit and more languages can participate in the internet as a way to better connect the world. So I hope you think about these things, and if you have any questions, I hope you think more deeply about the dimension of exclusion. If we find the internet as a global platform exists only to benefit just a few languages, what do we lose as a result? As a global community, how much of the world's global cultural heritage is being hindered from being shared and being experienced by everyone else because of this limitation? So thank you very much for listening. I will drop a few links about my work, and I hope this short talk inspires you to think more about the languages we speak in the world and the exclusion that technology sometimes places and the opportunities that exist for technology. Thank you.